With that, I'm Peter Hawkins. I'm co-chair of the board with Dan Hasika, who has stepped back to his office. He'll be back here for the cocktail later on. We have many of our chapter members from all across Canada here, so I want to make sure that through the day and through the evening cocktail, you say hello to everybody. And we have some very special guests as well. I have two things that I want to share with you before we do start. There are 16th annual Doing Business in Brazil. First of all, there is a QR code that you can see the full order of events. Has everybody had a chance to find that? Look at that. Okay, I'm going to say that as a yes. And I want to do two things. One thing we have done already, we're going to do it again for this event, and that is a land acknowledgement. A lot of people wonder why we do land acknowledgements. We do land acknowledgements to acknowledge history. This is a place that has a tremendous history long before people who look like me came here. And Brazil has a long history with indigenous people as well, and we have this commonality, we have this experience where we're trying to reconcile what happens in the world now and what happened in the world before. So I want to acknowledge that the land that we are on right now are the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, and home to the Métis. And most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. That land acknowledgement is, while it's very brief, actually comes from quite a long consultation, a terrible consultation, to be honest with you, with what has happened to the indigenous people in this country. So I want everybody to understand something very important, is that you can't forget history. So for good or for bad, you should always honor it. Now, in addition to that, we have a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee headed by Jamili Cruz, and in that committee, Dr. Laura Method of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee has come up with a mantra that I would like to share with you all. It is really a lovely statement of commitment, and it's not binding, but it is something that I like to think is aspirational. And so her mantra for diversity, equity, and inclusion is, together we stand as leaders, embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We recognize that DEI is not just the right thing to do, but essential for our organization's success. We lead the charge, understanding that diversity and inclusion practices must permeate all aspects of our business. It is not a standalone initiative, nor confined to HR policies alone. By weaving DEI into the fabric of our organization, we cultivate an environment where every individual thrives, innovation flourishes, and collective potential is realized. With unwavering commitment, we engage with our employees and members to foster real and sustainable change. Let us forge ahead, united in our mission to create a diverse and inclusive future that transcends boundaries and elevates us all. So thank you all for that. And now, rather than opening remarks for Doing Business in Brazil, pardon me? I did it first. Yes? Adriana is so sick of my voice. So Adriana is our new executive director. After a year-long search, we have this wonderful person. And I told Adriana that no matter what I do, she can do it better and she can overrule me. And she's already ignoring me. So I just want you to know that that's the kind of leader we want. So I'm thrilled to have her here. And so with that in mind, I actually want to bring up somebody else here. I want to bring up Henrique Bilbao. So Henrique, come on up here. This is our Doing Business in Brazil, and I'm going to actually start it with talking about initiatives that we have moving forward. We have always been a mining chamber, a lawyer chamber, a service chamber, but now we are also a tech chamber. And so Henrique comes from Acachi in Santa Catarina, and we've gone down there multiple times now, and we're developing a very strong relationship, and he has actually created Acachi Canada, which he's developing. We have Lisandro here, who has actually brought his company up and is starting a whole work-sharing program in Kitchener-Waterloo. And but he's going to tell a little bit of just about what he's been doing. I gave him 3 minutes. He gave me 35 slides. I will be killing him later. So here we go. And go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Can I jump this slide, Peter?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me these 2 minutes. The idea is what Acachi is doing, what Santa Catarina is doing. In Brazil, we have 275,000 tech companies. And my focus is talk about Santa Catarina. In Brazil, the population is more than 214 million people. And Santa Catarina, we have just 1% of the territory, 3% of the population, but 20% of all startups are there. And what is happening there? In fact, we have 22,000 tech companies in all the state, and 1,600 are ACAT members. 1,630 companies are tech members. This means 70% of the revenue of the states are in these members. It's amazing. And while Brazil is growing 50% in new companies, tech companies per year, ACAT is growing 104% per year. Okay, what we are doing there? We have 50 different programs. 50 is a lot of programs. And the best for me and Lisandro is internationalization, of course. Lisandro is here with me, is the director of the internationalization area, and I am the vice president of this tech association. I am volunteer the last 10 years in this tech association. And inside all of these groups, my focus is talk about the globalization we are doing in Acati. And example, this year we brought 50 companies from Brazil to Canada during the collision. And I separate is a lot of slides because I separate many pictures. Okay, we visited companies like Latam, Accelerator Century, Google, SunPower. We visited Collision during those 3 days. We had a cocktail there. It was amazing, this cocktail. Until today, the NPS is 10. Everybody loved it. We had a meeting with a lawyer officer to teach our tech companies how to incorporate here in Canada. It was amazing. We visited the TSX. We visited Microsoft. We visited Communitech, the mayor of Kitchener. Why Kitchener? Because Kitchener is almost the same of Blumenau, a city in Santa Catarina. It's a German city with Oktoberfest, tech companies, all with beer works, right? And he's the mayor with the secretary of our state and the secretary of development of Blumenau city. We have meetings with the mayor. We visited Velocity Accelerator Center, the Kitchener Market, the Accelerator Center of Waterloo, and we finished with beer, of course. And because of that, was so nice bring Brazilians to Canada, we decided to bring Canadians to Brazil. And here they are. They visited Acati.
Great black. Oh shit, I'm terrible.
And what's happened there? We visited 7 different tech hubs in Santa Catarina. We brought 10 tech companies. We received 44 applications, but only 10 could participate. This happened in Blumenau, Santa Catarina. This happened also in Blumenau with the mayor of the city. Here is the Oktoberfest place. We visited a city called Joinville. They have a cat there. Here's the same city, Joinville. We visited Balneário Camboriú, other big city in Santa Catarina. We brought all the Canadians to the center of the event in the first day to have a nice picture in the first moment of the event, the Startup Summit. We brought the Consulate of Canada in Brazil to talk with these Canadians to explain why 10,000 people are talking about technology in this event. It was amazing. We made a cocktail. Peter helped us a lot. I asked it to talk there to open the cocktail. We call it an international cocktail with more than 100 people. It was amazing. We asked the Canadians tech companies to do a pitch deck there. It was amazing. They pitched there. And that's it. This is Akati, thank you so much. And if you want to do business with tech in Brazil, talk to me.
4 minutes. So one thing I want to stress too. So Heineke organized this trade mission, and it was terrific. And we are going to be doing it again. These events are very worthwhile to attend, okay? And the nice thing about this that he didn't emphasize is in those organizations, 2 companies did deals. So Anne-Sophie Caron did a deal, the EV battery thing. She had actually solved a problem that she was able to share with her Brazilian counterparts. And the belt. Mathieu, yeah, Mathieu had a Displad is the name of the company, and it is a belt that measures fluid around the heart. He was able to actually initiate a clinical trial in Hinovida Hospital, and so they did a deal. We have a couple more deals that look like are going to be coming down, so super, super exciting. This is a really worthwhile event to go on, and one of the best things about it is that I went on it, and I'll tell you why. Coaching. We coached everybody on how to deliver their message. So these were geniuses. Every person was smarter than anything you've ever seen before, but getting their message across was really important. So by coaching each person and letting them understand, and Paula's a coach, and Ingrid's a coach, Patricia's a coach, Bernadette's a coach. We have people here who do that all the time. It's really important to understand that no matter how good your project is, if you can't pitch it, it's not worth pursuing, okay? Full stop, it's not worth pursuing. Now one thing I have forgotten to do, and I just want to stress too, before we get into our panels, is that we are here because of the generosity of sponsors. And so our platinum sponsor is Valley, and Valley has been tremendous for us. Actually, can you go to the slide with the sponsors? So that I can read it. And so Valley is a tremendous sponsor and incredibly valuable to us. 4B Mining and Proactiva are our gold sponsors, and they are also great members and really supportive, and we're really happy to have them. Centennial College has been a sponsor. Centennial College is here with our footwear. There you go, and we have many Centennial College students. Please speak to those students. Those are the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, okay? And in fact, tomorrow is yesterday. Things are moving so quickly. They're all developing stuff now, all right? I want you to really understand that. In addition to that, we have SMB Immigration, which is Sonia's company. It's a wonderful immigration company. Mellowhawk Logistics, now celebrating 20 years. That's our company. Sescom Berrieux, with our new wonderful director, it's Danielle Gamiso. Sescom Berrieux is a law firm that is very valuable. Brookfield Developments, obviously. BMA is another great law firm. And Lundin Mining, which has been a long-time member. As you know, we do lots of mining organizations. Now, with that in mind, I don't want to use up any more time. We have Paula Sad, who's going to come up and introduce Anouk's team. Come on in.
So we're going to have we were lucky enough to have an introduction by Anouk Begeron. She's the head trade commissioner for the Canadian Consulate in São Paulo in a long, time frame of the Chamber of Commerce. And then following that, we're going to have a small presentation by John Welsh, who was the past president of the Canadian American Chamber of Commerce, and he's been a director at our chamber for a long, long time. And then we start with a panel. So we first start now with Anouk's message.
Good afternoon, bon après-midi à toutes et à tous. I'm Anouk Bergeron La Liberté. I'm the Senior Trade Commissioner representing the Government of Canada and leading the Canadian trade team here in Brazil. Just to give you some context, we have 6 trade offices in Brazil staffed by over 30 dedicated individuals working hard to strengthen the Canada-Brazil trade and investment relationship, all in support of Canadian companies. I've had the privilege of working in various roles in Brazil since 2010, and today I find myself speaking to you from the vibrant heart of São Paulo. I'm truly delighted to participate remotely in this panel discussion, and I'd like to extend my thanks to the Chamber for inviting me to share some insights on doing business in Brazil. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to witness numerous Canadian companies exploring the Brazilian market, and I must say I'm always amazed and proud of the remarkable capabilities of Canadian companies doing business in Brazil. In the past decade, we've seen Brazil's resilience and ability to thrive through ups and downs. What often comes to mind when we think of Brazil are its stunning beaches, lively nightlife, its massive economy, and yes, its complex business regulations. However, Brazil is much more than this, and today I hope to shed light on some of its unique qualities. Brazil holds a prominent position not only in the Americas, but on the global stage as well. It's big in every sense, the 5th largest country by land area, the 6th largest population worldwide, and the 10th largest GDP globally, among other distinctions. Moreover, Brazil is a sophisticated market with large, globally recognized companies, a thriving innovation ecosystem, and a presence in virtually every industry. Canada actively engages with Brazil across these sectors through Canadian companies. We really believe that we have much to offer, and the critical piece is understanding where your organization fits into the Brazilian market. So beyond these broad strokes, what should you consider when you're exploring Brazil as a potential market? It is a place of niche opportunities where you bring something that complements existing offerings. Success often requires partnerships that help you navigate the complexity of the market, whether through sales, joint ventures, or even collaborative product development. Therefore, diligent homework is essential before embarking on your journey in Brazil. You must identify your niche and understand how your offerings align with local needs. From a cultural perspective, Brazil stands apart from the rest of Latin America, primarily due to its language, Portuguese, and it's not Spanish here. While English is widely spoken, Brazilians often prefer to communicate in Portuguese, emphasizing their desire to express themselves fully and meaningfully. Furthermore, Brazil is not a uniform market. It's a tapestry of diverse cultures and regions. In fact, there are many Brazils within Brazil, each with its unique dynamics and flavors. This complexity presents immense potential, but also necessitates diverse strategies and partners to navigate effectively. Returning to the theme of collaboration, the not alone aspect is critical. Building relationships and collaborating with local partners are fundamental to success in this market. Brazil's advanced economy offers endless possibilities, but it requires creativity. It's not a traditional market where you can merely show up and do business as usual. Preparation and adaptability are essential, as I mentioned previously, and the rewards can be substantial. Lastly, but much like many Latin countries, building strong relationships with Brazilians is vital. Developing rapport goes beyond business. It's about embracing the culture and showing genuine curiosity about what it means to Brazilians. Now, where do I see Brazil going? I see a bright future for Brazil, with its substantial industrial base, global corporations, local industry strength, abundant natural resources, agricultural expertise, and a thriving innovation ecosystem. Brazil is poised for continued growth. It's important to remember that despite the challenges and occasional negative portrayals in international press, Brazil has consistently progressed. And additionally, I foresee growing demand in Brazil for modernizing traditional sectors while addressing sustainability goals. This includes sustainable agriculture, manufacturing, and extractive industries through innovative technology. There's also a need for clean tech solutions to support Brazil's ambitious objectives, such as universalizing water and sanitation services, areas in which Canada excels. I could delve deeper into the complexity and opportunities that Brazil offers, but I'll pause here to pass the microphone to my fellow panelists. And I want to really express my gratitude for your participation in the 16th edition of Doing Business with Brazil, organized by the BCCC. And furthermore, I would like to congratulate the BCCC on the 50th anniversary and acknowledge the Chamber's remarkable contributions to fostering growth in the Canada-Brazil trade, investment, and innovation relationship. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Obrigada.
Thank you. The BCC has been working in the Trade Commission services for a long time. We organize events together. Every conversation a lot of decisions are made together with them, and seeing what the Canadian government and the Brazilian government can work together. At the same time, we work, Vanja, our Ambassador Vanja Matanobrika, she is the Consul General here in Toronto. She was a minister here before. We just had an outgoing ambassador in Ottawa. We work together in Vancouver. We work together with, this is the big differential of BCC, is that we have always worked together with both sides, the government of both sides, to make sure that we're doing the best for business, but we're also aligned in our message, which is very important for us. Actually, I just realized I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Paola Sad. I am the founder and CEO of Mandala Group, and also the COO of Banking Book Analytics, a fintech, and past president of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. And I would like to welcome you all again to this event. And with that, I would love to invite John Welsh, founder and CEO of the Research for Emerging Markets, REM, past president of the Brazil American Chamber of Commerce, and director of the BCCC. John, please.
Well, thank you very much, Paola, Peter, and all of you. It's a real pleasure to be back here. Just following on Henrique's comments, Brazil was the champion in startups in the last 3 years in the world. And part of that had to do with some reform that was done a couple of years ago, but we'll talk about that. This is the green one, the big green one, right? Begin. I gave my first one of these, I think, in 2012, doing business in Brazil here. And I could just take out that presentation and show it again, unfortunately. But as I said at that time, and I'm going to say it again, I'm extremely positive long-term for Brazil, because it's a functioning democracy. When things don't go right, you get a reaction in Congress, you get a reaction in the voting public, and you get a reaction in the courts. And so many of the things that I'm going to just outline to you, I totally believe the direction is going to go back to sort of something a little bit correct. I'm just going to present the data. I'm not going to be normative about this. I hate, when I was at the chamber in New York, one of the conditions of my employment as executive director is I couldn't have an opinion. And you know what that's like if you're an economist. It doesn't work very well. And I go into the bathroom and give my own opinion to myself. It was pretty good. You know. But I've called this pedal to the metal, but in what direction? And I'll let you decide that. And again, a lot of these things are already being reversed, and Brazil is big. So things get politicized that don't make any sense to be politicized. Neither executives or other politicians have anything to do with it. I was going to start off by showing some of the stuff in the Amazon. I'm not going to do that here. But the reason the amount of focus, burnings, illegal burnings and deforestation went down so much. Actually, they're half of what they used to be in the first decade of the 2000s. It's because of a thing called debt terre. Had nothing to do with the president or politics or anything like that. They use satellites to find people that are doing things wrong, and they can get to them much faster. So again, there's a lot of politicization of things that, well, anyway, it's sort of like when I jumped in front of Pelé and acted like we were the best buddies. Anyway, here's a list of things that I consider a recipe for a huge recession, and we've seen this with inflation. We've seen this before in Brazil, and a couple of these are already being reversed. Okay. The first is a massive increase in primary, that's non-interest spending by the federal government. That is what you're going to see. That's really well on its way. Second, they got rid of the spending ceiling, a very simple and clear rule that when you have an emergency like a pandemic, you give some waiver to it and then you go back to it. The thing that they put in place is, first, it's not working. Second, I don't see how it can work. It basically has an increase in primary spending chased by increases in taxes. And the tax part is way behind, and certainly the Brazilian Congress isn't going to approve massive tax increases. So that's not going to happen. They are using creative accounting again to hide these deficits. It's a little different way than they did before. They aren't using the state banks. They can't do that anymore. There's a law against it. But there's other ways to do it, and they're actually doing it through the judicial system, through not precatorios, but other judgments in the judicial system where they can borrow against them and then default. That's sort of what they're doing. Hold administered prices like gasoline and other things below the international price. We had a big catch-up, but we're still not there in gasoline prices. They were almost 30% below international prices. We had that in the period 2019 and 2016, and that created an $85 billion hole in Petrobras and led to some other fun things that weren't so good. Expand the number of ministries to an unmanageable number. Okay, so now it's at 39. I think we're going on 40. No one knows what any of them do, and it's expanding the number of workers in the public sector. Increase subsidies in general and try to give state banks the ability to expand credit massively. They want to. They're being held back by the legislation. I would say that that is a work in progress. That's why I have the guy that we're working with. They were already rejected. They've been trying to eliminate the independence of the Brazilian central bank. There was an effort in Congress that was rejected by Congress. And Arthur Lira, I was with him in New York right before this happened. He said, we're not going backwards. We worked too hard to get this stuff done. And I think that's also true. I didn't put it up here with the labor reform that was done under Temer. And that's why we have these huge startups, because you don't have to be in judicial court every 2 seconds. You can open up, outsource, and things like that. And I don't think Congress is going to go along with getting rid of that. They want to get rid of it. Extend subsidized credit to the state banks, to foreign countries, mostly bad credits, such as Argentina, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Angola paid back, but they're not particularly a good credit if you look at their spreads. And then finally, redo the concessions on infrastructure projects. They tried to do sanitation, it was rejected by Congress. You're having massive amounts of private investment in sanitation right now, which is like, Brazil needs much better sanitation. The per capita sanitation quality is very poor, and the government was never able to do it very well. So I think that will definitely be rejected. And then finally, they brought back they're very romantic about the past, this particular group of people. They've gone back to before the 1980s, where Brazil got rid of its interest rate ceilings and its usury law. They came on more forced. I dated it back to 1967 when Delfim Neto became the planning minister, because he put them back in place. They see high interest rates, let's get them down somehow. They're not going down. But that's not the way you get rid of high interest rates. When I was at Itaú, we worked with Febraban on this. There's reasons for the spreads being high. There's another program. What they do is they tried to control interest rates on credit cards to give a huge pushback from the banks. And then they also have this desenrolar system. They're making it easier to renegotiate and default on consumer credit. So, well, of course the interest rates are going to be higher if you expect every 2 years to have to renegotiate these credits. So, again, interest rate ceilings. If you want to read my book, it's out of print, but I'll send you a copy. I went through this whole thing in the 1970s. It was not good. Okay? But anyway, that's why I think, well, we'll look at what's happened. I'm not going to let you come to your own conclusions. These are kind of mine. Okay, inflation. This is where the central bank comes in. Inflation is back to within the band. Brazil was the first central bank in the world to start tightening. The United States was massively late. I wrote things criticizing the Fed where I used to work. Europe is still very late. The U.S. is doing better now, and Canada's late. And, the Brazilian central bank is now loosening because they can. Look at the decline in inflation. That's a present, by the way, to the current administration that they don't seem to appreciate. They continue to attack the central bank because of interest rates. And as the Fed is going to face this month and every other one, it's much easier to lower interest rates than raise them. So if you're at a place where you're getting inflation down, and then you think, oh, if inflation's gone too far, then you can lower them. But if you lower too soon or stop too soon, then you have to raise them. That's a big problem. The U.S. faced that big time in the 1970s. Here's the fiscal situation. As of October of 2022, the primary surplus was above 2% of GDP. That was a huge recovery from the huge expansion during the COVID, and Brazil was the #1 emerging market in providing assistance to the poor, especially. It may not seem that way. It's not the headlines in a number of newspapers worldwide, but they did. And then they were able to get their fiscal accounts back in order very quickly, which we are now at a 0.7% of GDP deficit as of July. So in less than 8 months, a 2% of GDP surplus has become a deficit of 1%, a swing of 3 percentage points of GDP. That's ungodly, really. It's not very good. And this new fiscal framework, the Arcabouço Fiscal, is not working so far, and they're going to keep trying to catch up to it. And finally, as I was saying, that the monetary conditions in Brazil are tight. Inflation has come down. They have room. Expect now interest rates cuts. If the central bank had ceded in the face of criticism to lower rates, that wouldn't have been very good for the credibility of the central bank. But technically, they have plenty of room. And what happened is they waited long enough to make it a justification for lowering rates. So, very quickly, the new Lula administration has already ramped up spending, lending from state banks, stopped privatization, and is reversing important microeconomic policy, or trying to. Because of the speed of implementation, the dilatory effects will appear in 2024. They actually started now. This is what is good about it. It's the same thing that happened between 2010 and 2016, but it's in fast forward. So I think that it'll culminate in something faster, and you'll get the reaction politically and policy-wise much faster than we have there. The only thing sort of holding this stuff together, really, right at this point, is Congress and the central bank. Now, this won't affect a lot of your businesses. This does not mean the business is going to be good in Brazil, independent of this. But this is more for people like me that deal with financial markets and spreads. I do expect a reaction to this about next year. Depends. One of the reactions may be Roberto Campos Neto comes up for a reappointment next year. Maybe they'll think about it a moment. Let's put him back in there. Maybe we get some credibility about this. We've seen this before, and we may see it again. And I'm sort of hoping, I'm rooting for this to happen. Politics, will determine the direction. As we know here in Canada, I don't follow Canada much, but the United States certainly. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a pain trade. But I do expect a positive reaction to this. And I said, politics in Congress have stayed the government's hand in many areas, and that's really exemplary about the sort of society Brazil is. And finally, some sectors will benefit, some sectors will suffer. The only thing that threatens the fintech and the startups is if they undo the labor law. Everything else is there. So whatever's going on in Brasilia, whatever narratives are going on the other side, I still am very positive about Brazil over the next couple of years, and certainly long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. I would like to call the next people in our panel. So on this panel, we're going to be talking about in the Brazilian market, and we're looking at practice steps in Brazil. So we have John Welsh. I would like to call Ingrid Polini, CEO and founder of Safety Docs, Arno Mello, CEO and founder of Hawk Logistics, and Philip Jeffrey, he's the head of the Canadian desk for FCR Law. Thank you so much for being here. So in this panel, we'd like to answer three main questions. So how to enter the Brazilian market, challenges and opportunities, mistakes that we have when entering in Brazil, and the main differences between Brazil and Canada. Some of them Anouk already pointed out. So I'd like to start by looking at what is happening in Brazil right now. We got the overlook from John, and what's to come, and what has been changing and doing business in Brazil. So I would like to start with Arno Mello, perhaps.
Wow. Okay. Hi. That's me.
Yeah, Arno, logistics company, very successful, 20 years in the market, congratulations. And he's been helping companies coming in and out of Brazil. So Arno, what would you say as practical steps of companies entering the Brazilian market, especially when it comes to the logistics part? What should they be looking for?
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you to the Chamber for the invitation. Nice to be here with the distinguished speakers. I think what Canadian companies need to know about Brazil when penetrating or selling products to Brazil is that you can only do so much. You cannot import your own product into Brazil. Brazil is one of the countries in the world that doesn't allow foreign companies to import their own product. So what you need to understand, and I talk to people every day, is that Brazilian companies ask Canadian companies, oh, can you calculate everything for me and deliver the product to my door? Well, you're not allowed to do that. So don't waste your time trying to calculate duties and taxes in Brazil when you're not entitled to do that. So your job is to build the best product possible, which is the Canadian brand, which is, we know it's amazing, and deliver perhaps to the closest airport and port in Brazil, and then the import procedures must be done by a Brazilian company. So I talk to a lot of Canadian companies that, I'm not going to use the word waste time, but they're so worried about finding the duties and taxes for their product in Brazil when it's literally impossible. We're going to talk a little bit later about that. So focus on the price of your product. Tell your client, look, I can deliver to you to this location closest to you, and then the Brazilian company needs to do the rest. So focus on that.
Thank you very, very much, Ron, for the practical steps. And linked to that, when we import products to Brazil, we all know about the huge taxation that we face, which is really doesn't help in in Canadian companies exporting to Brazil and looking at all that. So having, I always say that the three pillars of the triad of getting into Brazil is to have goods, definitely logistics, and then a law firm and taxation, because you can't even price a product if you don't have that information. So in preparation of going to Brazil, that's what you need. And Nick Jeffrey, he's a tax consultant, foreign consultant, is a tax expert, and he helps companies in Brazil do that. So what do you see as what's happening right now and the changes that are going to the legislation for companies to go into Brazil?
Hi everyone. I guess I'll use a little bit what Arnaud was saying is that taxes are high in Brazil. I have no doubt about this. But when I speak with Canadian companies that are looking at doing business in Brazil, I always tell them the following. You need to understand that Brazilian companies are also subject to those taxes. So, I mean, I see a lot of Canadian companies, when I provide them calculation, the tax rates that Arnaud is saying it's difficult to obtain, it is true. It is difficult to obtain because depending on where you do business and the flow of the transaction in Brazil, those variations will change the rate that you will be subject. But again, I think, so this is the first point. Brazilian company are also subject to the same tax that you will. So don't be scared if someone is telling you that if you're exporting to Brazil, you'll be paying 50% of taxes, as an example. I think the point, and this is really in connection with what Arnaud is doing, the additional cost that you will have, that Brazilian company that manage to do local sourcing will not be subject, is the import duty. Because obviously, if you're selling to Brazil, you will be subject to import duty, and the import duty is a cost. So this is, the central point, and then we'll get a little bit, because I'm extremely optimistic. I mean, I've been living in Brazil for 23 years. In 23 years, I went through different crises, different presidents, good ones, crazy ones. But I mean, I always say, like, at the office, they call me, I'm probably the more Brazilian foreigners that exist in São Paulo, because a lot of Brazilians are coming here to Canada. I'm very comfortable in São Paulo, and I'm going to stay in São Paulo. But we will get a little bit why I'm optimistic and what is going on right now, so that's my first comments on the question.
Thank you so much. And Ingrid, question for the tech companies that are going to Brazil. What is, because you are a mentor, with startups, besides having your own company that you founded, and you're working on that as well. What is when companies are going to Brazil, what are the 3 top things that you tell them when a tech company is going to Brazil?
I love that question. So I think the first thing that we have to understand is that a lot of startups in Canada don't know how much technology there already is in Brazil. So if you look at fintech, for example, in Brazil, if you compare even like bank apps from Canada to Brazil for the people that have it, like it's insane the technology that we have there. So I would say humility in the sense of looking at the market, because there's a lot still of bias when we talk about cultural bias and looking at South America and thinking that we're not as technological as we are in Canada, and that's a wrong misconception. The second thing is understanding that the market in in Brazil is huge. It's gigantic compared to Canada. So learning how to work that market and work with the people, especially if you're in B2C or even B2B, right? Working with Brazilian companies. I would say the third thing, that I could make a 20-point list, but the third thing would be, I always laugh when people complain about Canadian bureaucracy. I really do. Because the thing about it is not that Canada is not bureaucratic, but you can enter a website and you probably find a list of all the documents you need. So Felipe here actually helped me. I went through, when we were doing software, bringing SafetyDoc software from here to Canada, I went through about 3 lawyers and 2 accountants, and they couldn't tell me exactly how to do transfer pricing. And so it's hard to understand. So finding the right partners that can support you in entering the Brazilian market and can support to understand it, but also finding the right partners to market in Brazil. There's a lot of companies that failed in Brazil because they just tropicalized their product and put it in the Brazilian market and think that everyone is going to accept it. And it's not what happens. So I'll leave it there.
Beautiful, very informative, and it's people. What I don't know. I've for my company, thinking about 800 companies, like back and forth from Brazil and other countries, and we. One of the things that people don't understand is the cultural difference. They extend beyond just the handshake, which is a big deal. He understands how people do business, what they expect from you in doing business, the face-to-face, and also looking at Brazil. And it's a hard country to get in. It's not easy, but 230 million people. That's all I have to say. You have a huge market. And in even going to different regions in Brazil, you almost have to market your product in a different way because people expect to buy in a different way. So, John, with that, I ask you, when you're looking at Brazil in a big country and you know Brazil quite well and how Brazilians work, and you get into this new government and the economy that we're looking right now, and the taxation, what are the measures that you think that are sort of business friendly in terms of company going to Brazil?
There's been a number of them, including this tax reform that's in Congress right now. It's this one's been in the work for a long time. This is nothing new. I remember when I first was doing my dissertation research in the mid-'80s, one of the first bills of tax reform was there. And this is also true for labor reform. It passed the labor reform. This one, the problem is understanding it. It's a little bit complex because they're going to a value-added tax, and it's paid at the end, the final good. So the producers of the final good are saying, "Oh, I got to pay this 29% or whatever it's going to be when they choose the actual tax," but that's not the case because their inputs to production are going to price, and they don't see. It's very hard to convince somebody that they're going to pay less for whatever input, labor, etc. What they're doing. So I'm not a tax expert. I've been watching this a long time. Bernardo Appi, this is usually the way tax economists look at things, and that is that a consumption tax is much fairer, and this is what it is. But it's very hard to convince those that are, you have a lot of very invisible taxes in Brazil, and it makes it very difficult to change the tax system. For example, the income tax there is not that big a source of revenue, You know, you have two tax brackets. The average is 18% of income, which looks really small. But then we look at all the imputed taxes on goods and services. Brazil has a tax burden of well above 28%, which is huge for a country of Brazil's stature. So we'll see if this can work. This is going to be very good in the end for business. It's hard to convince business that it is, and you have a lot of negotiations going on. It's cumulative too. Like Brazil is big. What's going on right now is a bump in the road as far as I'm concerned, because a lot of really big things were done over the last 20 years. So they continue to improve the collateral on loans, which is very important for the capital market. And the other thing, I'll stop here, I've already talked enough, but I did my dissertation, part of it on the capital markets reforms that were done in the 60s. Brazil was, the stock market in Brazil, the equities market, is an extension of the managerial market, which both have developed really well. You have really good managers, so many of them are in this room, and you have a very vibrant market for corporate control. And it's not a place you raise money, it's really corporate control. And it disciplines the companies extremely well. And this is, no place in Latin America has something like this. You don't have the same type of turnover of management, turnover of ownership, like you have in Brazil, which is comparable even more to the United States than maybe even Canada. But there's many other things that I can do, but let me stop right there and I'll come back with you.
Thank you. So we're looking back at Eri's slides, and that this is a repeat of 2010-2016, which was incredible for business and was really good for Canadian business going to Brazil. The amount of Canadian companies, there was, I don't know, how many trade missions we did a year. Like, I lost count. And they were well received in Brazil if they had the right technology. And we're looking at so many different sectors. There was a mission that we did, that Arno and Peter were there too, where I think we had 12 different sectors going on this trade mission. And it was good for everyone. Almost every company that was there. Some were exploratory, but a lot of them were, just settled in Brazil, and it's great to hear when they are there. So when looking at this sort of this new year, this new government that's coming in, and this is a question for the panel. How do you see the Brazilian companies going into Brazil, and do you see, keep in mind those years, what kind of opportunities do you see them having when going to Brazil right now?
Oh my God, I'll start. I think there's huge opportunity. First of all, as we talk about tax reform, of course, and if you know your responsibilities when you're shipping something to Brazil or selling something to Brazil, Brazil is not for amateurs, right? We need to know that. We know that in a business sense, but you also know that in logistics sense. I'd like to point out that in the first part of my speech, I want to say that every time I talk to a Canadian company, they're very worried that Brazil is corrupt in logistics, right? So I want to make it very clear to everyone, Brazil is not corrupt in any sense. If you start your business correctly, if you start logistics correctly, if you have partners like Jeffrey and Ingrid and other people that will advise you, or a logistics company that will advise you, your shipment is going to go through, your sales is going to go through. You need to believe in that. So there's a lot of stuff in the news that you hear about. It never reflected in our business in 30 years of doing business with Brazil. So you need to follow rules. So people confuse rules and regulations with corruption, which I think I hear this from Canadian companies, and it upsets me tremendously. So we need to have a sense of that. As we move forward, we see, when I talk about logistics, we see a lot of improvement in terms of logistics in Brazil. There's a new system coming up in Brazil of a pre-declaration of goods like we have in Canada. We have something called e-manifest. Something needs to be pre-declared when it comes into Canada. Brazil is now in the final stages of implementing a pre-declaration of cargo that's going to be done by the freight forwarder in Brazil. Why is that? Well, of course, they want to speed up the importation process, starting with air freight. So there's a lot of ports that are going private in Brazil, as we know. So things are moving much faster from the port onwards, or the port importation side. We know Brazil does not have a very effective rail system like Canada. Canada is built because of rail. Like, 99%, I'm going to say 99, but every container that moves across Canada, it moves via rail. So we're very effective in rail. Brazil is not effective, and my dream is that Brazil improves that movement of containers and not just do it by road, which causes delays, cost increases, anything you can imagine when you use a truck to move a container from the middle of Brazil all the way to the port, lineups and everything else. So there is a change in that direction, so I think the future looks very, very positive. We continue to ship to Brazil every single day. Business has not changed. We see a huge increase every single day, and I hope that will continue. Sorry to extend my answer to you.
Perfect. Anyone else?
I can say something. Just I want to say that Brazilians are very resilient, right? We joke that entrepreneurs from Brazil can literally do entrepreneurship anywhere because it's such a complex system. But at the same time, for the Canadian companies planning to enter Brazil, is because Brazilians are resilient, even with the change of government and change in laws and all that, there's a lot of untapped opportunity in the sense of labor. So people, like we have a shortage of tech people here in Canada, and there's a lot of very high qualified people in Brazil. People in Brazil, and this is important to say, when you start university, you usually start internships right away. It means that they have more years of experience. They work in companies for longer. So all of that are very beneficial for developers. There's a lot of developers coming from Brazil, working from Brazil. When you talk about technology, there is incentive. For example, when we had the foreign ministers of Santa Catarina, and I talked to him today actually, that they are willing to talk just on the mission that we had from Brazilians. He was here. There was a two Brazilian entrepreneurs that talked to him and wanted to open a factory in Brazil. He's like, hey, let's talk, and gave tax incentives. So there's a lot that can be done by having the right partners, but also knowing that Brazil is a great labor market. There is a lot of people willing to work, and Brazilians work very hard.
Just a few comments. Taking a little bit, when I'm here in Canada, I talk about Brazil. I try to avoid saying the same things that everybody is saying, including Brazilian lawyers, when they come to Canada, when they go abroad. Complexity, corruptions, everything is difficult. I mean, come on. Corruptions. No one here will deny that there is some corruption in Brazil. Is there corruption in Canada? Of course. Is there corruption in the United States? Of course. So I mean, just to give you an example, sometimes, obviously the past few years in Brazil with Bolsonaro, Brazil was an easy target about news, and this is normal. Also, even me, I was totally agree with the news that was coming out. But I mean, it's a bit like what everybody is saying here. We need to demystify a little bit all those urban legends. I was talking a couple of months ago with a large, I'm not talking about a mid-sized company here. I was talking with a large Quebec international multinational, that were looking, and they are in the agro business. They were looking at Brazil and they were looking at Argentina. Okay, I talked with them a couple of times, talk about Brazil, how things are working. At the end, they say, we're not too secure about Brazil. I think we'll start our first business in South America and Argentina. When they told me this, I say, come on, I mean, did you get my message? Do I speak the right language to you? Because, I mean, if you have some aversion to risk and you're looking at Brazil and Argentina, I think you should go from the Brazilian side, about this. But again, not to be too long. Few things about the tax reform, and if you want after that, I can discuss. Who are interested to hear about the Brazilian tax reform, which is something quite fantastic. To comment a little bit what John was mentioning, because our office, we are fully involved in the tax reform. Eduardo Fleury is one of the consultants for the government. He has been involved. Just few insights. I believe that the tax reform of the indirect tax system, which is currently what is at the Senate under discussion, will be passed. I think like the votes at the Chamber of Deputy was clear indications that where we are going with this. And this is great news for Canadian companies because you will, and obviously the way that it is right now, the tax reform will start if it is approved, will start in 2026, and there will be like a phase out system that will go until 2032. So you still have some time to prepare yourself, but at the same time, we're talking about a system that was, to a certain extent, based on the Canadian VAT system and other system around the world. So this will simplify quite a lot the way that you will do business, because coming back to the tax, the problem that Canadian companies are facing right now, they know that their product, market price is 100. When they do search in Brazil to see what is the price of similar product in Brazil, they will get, as an example, well, it's 150, so they say, wow, we are super competitive because our product is worth 100 and it's sold in Brazil for 150. What they overlook is that in Brazil, all the taxes are included in the price. So if you look at something that is worth 100 that is sold in Brazil for 150, potentially your pricing in Brazil will be something near 150 also. But if we get into this tax reform with the input, output, and credit system, Canadian company will be able to do some search, and the tax will be like in Canada, excluded from the price, which is not the case right now. So all of this should simplify and should make Brazil always been an attractive market. I always say like Canadian companies cannot not look at Brazil. But I think, looking forward, all of this, it's all positive for what is going on.
John?
So I wanted to echo what Jeffrey, Arnold, and Ingrid have said. Especially, Ingrid, you took my story about the fintech folks. But yeah, it's like when I was at the Chamber in New York, we get companies come, I'm going to go in Brazil for fintech. And I said, Brazil's way ahead of you. And maybe that's because of the legacy of inflation. But I think it is.
I call it rebranding.
Yes. And, it's really what I didn't talk about first on, and it's sort of touched on by everybody here, is that Brazil has a huge number of entrepreneurs, and they're very creative. So I remember talking to my father. My father was at Arthur Andersen. He used to, his clients, he'd go and fight with, he said Delphine, not to, Delphine and I ended up knowing each other later, but, the Brazilian military wanted companies to bring in machinery. And he's like, no, they want to bring in blueprints. It would have been software back then now, but it's the same thing. So when you go in Brazil, bringing somebody, and you've already said this, something pre-packaged maybe is not the way to do it. Bring your knowledge of technology and talk to the Brazilians, because they can maybe come up with something that's more amenable to the labor market, for the transportation, and so forth. And it's not an accident Brazil is exporting technology and services to Africa over the last 30 years. It's a really huge thing, especially in architecture. And finally, thank you for bringing up railroads. This not only does it have the problem of not, when you don't have enough railroads, the concessions were changed, and we're starting to get some pretty good investment in railroads. But that was also a decision by prior governments, and it also leaves the truckers a huge power. They can stop the country on a moment's notice. That explains some of the gasoline subsidies, and that's not a good situation to be if you can be held for ransom in that way. So anyway, but on the whole, especially the managers, the entrepreneurs, the computer programmers, and so forth. Most of my friends, when I came up here and met families, most of them are computer programmers. A couple of lawyers, a couple of accountants too, but anyway. But it is a huge market for this, and a great talent group.
I was actually,
I just want to say that we shouldn't forget that hopefully Canada will enter the Mercosur and negotiations will engage again, because that will be such an attractive thing for Canadians, right? Brazil and the Mercosur with Canada, or whatever trade agreement. We need a trade agreement with Brazil of some kind. But I think going back to what Jeffrey said, and Ingrid and everyone, is partnership. You need to partner with the right people in Brazil. Don't be afraid of Brazil, as Jeffrey would say. Like, we all need to do our job.
His name is Felipe.
Sorry.
Felipe Jeffrey.
Thank you, Peter, but I'm used to that.
Thank you, Peter. I've been to his office. I had lunch with him. I should know this better, but anyway. I do recommend clients to him because he knows what he's talking about. I can do PR for him at the moment in the stage. Thank you. I got interrupted my train of thought. But anyway, partnership. Partnership is super important. As the current president for CIFA, the Canadian International Freight Forwarders Association, I want you all to know that Canada holds over 400 freight forwarders that can service you in any market. As a freight forwarder, find a partner that knows the market that you're going to. Find a lawyer that knows what it's talking about. Find a tech company. Find an economist that knows what they're talking about, and partner with those companies because it's going to solve a lot of your problems in that market.
And just one comment regarding fintechs and technology and all this. Yes, 2 days ago I was in Montreal doing a presentation, and some people from the Caisse Populaire were at the meetings, and we're talking about the financial market. I look at them and I say, do you know, guys, we have something that is called PIX in Brazil. And for those who do not know what is a PIX, if one of you has got a bank account in Brazil, just send me the bank account numbers. In 1 second, I can deposit money in your bank account, and you don't even need to approve the transactions. So I was, that's the best example how advanced Brazil is regarding like the financial market and the technology.
I'd add open banking to that. Brazil's way ahead in open banking. I can go into my Santander app and lend money to somebody through the bank, and they do all the due diligence, and that's really more advanced than anywhere else that we see. They like crypto too. I don't like it.
I just want to make one comment about that I forgot about Canadian companies entering the Brazilian market. The biggest advantage is that we like to say that Canada isn't conservative, but companies are quite conservative in terms of adopting new technology. Okay? And I like to say this, and in Brazil, companies are way more prone to adopting new technology if they think it's going to benefit them and do a proof of concept and all that. I've worked in both markets, I've sold in both markets, and I can tell you that Canadian companies are people like to think that Canada is kind of like the same as the US. No, the Canadian companies are way more conservative than Brazilian companies working into the B2B sector.
And okay. I agree with you. Like it's way in Brazil the adoption is much faster than Canada. People are used to change. I remember saying that every like house help that you had in the late 80s was like a CEO because they knew exactly they'll buy the sugar today is like $1 real and 1 cruzeiro, whatever it was the monetary, and then they know that next time it's going to be 120. They knew exactly how to budget. So this is the resilience of the Brazilians. I think this all came from a time of really high inflation. So we need to end in 4 minutes, but I doing business in Brazil, we usually do something called the crystal ball, which is what you think is going to happen, and it can be like the wildest thing in the next year in Brazil that you foresee happening. It could be in taxation, in government, in doing business in Brazil. Just 1 or 2 phrases each. So we'll start with John.
This is outrageous. The CBF is going to finally hire Guardiola as a...
Hold on now.
Wait.
He nodded. She shook her head.
Anyway, that's doing pretty well now.
Go ahead.
Okay, I do think you're going to have a rethinking of a better assessment of the reforms that have been done over the last, it's not just the last administrations, over the last 2 administrations in terms of reform. Unfortunately, one of the people that started this was Eduardo Guardia, who's now passed away, unfortunately. But a lot of the reforms started there. And a lot of the things we're seeing passed in Congress owe themselves to work done before. And it's really made Brazil more competitive. The tax reform, once they convince people, and I think it's going to also help if you're an exporter to Brazil as well. That's my guess. We're sort of looking at simulations and things. So the import duties will probably be reduced because you sort of get double taxed, both right now with the import duty that you pay plus the ICMS. And some states allow some drawbacks. So there's many things that are already there. PIX is one of them. go to BR was a big advance. It didn't help me much in getting my RNA again because they had my wife as my mother.
John, that was way too much than two phrases. But go on.
No, I had to go to the NSF. But anyway, I think also you're going to see a better understanding of sort of where Brazil is, other than the headlines that you see.
Perfect. And Ingrid.
Can I go last?
Huh?
Can I go last?
Yeah. Philippe.
Philippe Jeffries next, everyone.
Yeah.
Just to make sure you know. It's
Rapid
Philippe
fire
Jeffries.
questions.
Thank you, Peter Hawkins. I'll talk to you later about this.
Oh man, someone is in trouble.
The evening is going to be long.
Long drive home.
No, I mean, what I see a lot of Canadians moving to Brazil, to immigrate in Brazil soon, since it's such a great country to live, and it is a great country to live in. But I mean, again, looking at what the government has been doing for the past 8 months, actually, my people that works with finance, with economy and all this, are quite surprised of the good job that Haddad is doing, the current Minister of Finance. I think people are surprised. They weren't expecting this. But I think the tax reform, the way that it is, I think the most difficult part will be the tax reform of the corporate income tax and individual taxation. That might be a little bit more difficult to approve. Regarding the free trade agreement between Mercosur and Canada, it is on the agenda. Obviously, the priority number one right now is the EU-Brazil free trade agreement. But as far as I know, and it's not that easy to get information, it seems that the discussion regarding the Mercosur and free trade agreements are currently taking place. There are a few points that are difficult. Something that is very international tax, Brazil has aligned its transfer pricing legislations based on the OECD model. This is a great achievement. Brazil is doing everything. It's difficult to say one sentence what I see.
I can see that. But we have 3 minutes.
But again, all of this, tax reform, transfer pricing, free trade agreement, I foresee a great future for Brazil. And again, my name is Philippe.
I'll take you for dinner after and drinks for this. Crystal ball. Oh my God, they said everything. I just hope there's some kind of a trade agreement. The diplomats in the building, please, in the room, help with the trade agreement between Canada and Brazil. We need it. When we started CETA in Canada in the European community, 2017, I believe, 2017, overnight, duty-free of items between Europe and Canada, and our clients benefited so much. So any kind of reform, any kind of agreement with Brazil will change everything, I think. So that's my dream. And of course, the rail system. We need a rail system in Brazil. A lot of grain exports from Brazil, private companies are using their own rail to get to ports, but it would be nice if the entire country benefited from a rail integration with the ports. That would help Brazil tremendously on imports and exports. Ingrid,
thank you.
So
you're the last
I
one.
stole from you, and I'm going to steal from him because I like that answer. But I think that, so first of all, I would love to see a trade agreement between Canada and Brazil. But more than that, we've been trying to work hard, not just me, but the other chapters, co-chairs, trade agreements between states and provinces. And I know that some of those are happening because we're having good conversations today, and we're going to make that happen. So I'll just go with that then.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, my wonderful, do you have a word?
No.
Okay. Thank you so much for this great panel of friends and colleagues, and thank you for information. I love doing this panel because it really gives real information to people doing business in Brazil. So again, thank you very much to my panel. And the next, Peter, do you want to come up and introduce Jason? Thank you. Oh, for a while.
No, stand. It's more flattering to stand. Rules, rules, rules. While they're doing the photo op, I'm going to tell you something funny. I have a great honor. One of the wonderful roles that I get to do as a co-chair is I get to talk about the fantastic people who are both in the room and in the ether. And so while they're taking their beautiful picture, just 1 second, take it. Dave is doing it. Everybody smile. Oh, he's got me too. Okay. Get off. Okay. Get off. All right. So. That has been the kind of, I've talked all day, folks, so I'm so sick of me, I'm sure you are too. But what I have a great honor right now is to introduce Jason Toland, who is the Director General of Global Affairs. Jason Toland has actually been a great friend of the Chamber, and I met him at PDAC this past year. And what he has to say is not only about what is happening between Canada and Brazil, but it's what is happening with all the people who work at Global Affairs and the hard work that they do all the time trying to represent Canada to the world. And so we have a really unique situation to have such a high-level person here, and we're going to be followed too by Rachel Guthrie, who is going to be able to speak to us from EDC, and Julian Ovens, who is also going to be speaking to us from Crestview Strategy in a panel moderated by Daniela. But we have Jason Toland, who is going to speak to us now and share his thoughts about Canada and Brazil, and we are deeply honored to have him here. And then after the panel, we have a little special guest to introduce you to. So, Jason, over to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter, and I hope you can hear me clearly enough. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I do want, for the Canadians in the room, I want to make clear that this is part of our commitment to reducing expenses in professional services and travel, and that's why I didn't make it there. I closed off, I heard the closing of the panel. I was following some of what you said, and I'll take note of your interest in the Mercosur-Canada FTA. It's something that has a particular place close to my heart because I was actually the first trade counsel assigned by the Government of Canada to that file in 2002. So this is a bit like a long gestating baby for me. It's a file that has been, of course, now in my current capacity as Director General for South American and Inter-American Affairs, something that we are looking at very closely, but in a different context. Although I'm not as engaged on the trade side as I was previously, it's to situate this in the context of this intervention here. It's really as much about what it is that we're trying to do in our relations bilaterally with Brazil and how that plays into the larger narrative that you are alive to very clearly globally. The world, whether it's shifted or not dramatically, remains to be seen, and everybody will have a view on this. But it's certainly the case that relative to where we were in conversations with Brazil when we initiated our negotiations on the Mercosur, Canada FTA, a lot of black swans have been flying around. That has changed a great deal of the dialogue that we have, not so much necessarily with Brazil, but with countries Canada in the region and Canada with globally. And necessarily, I know that you are all extremely versed in your sectors. My intention here is not to sort of give rough numbers about bilateral trade and the extent of our broad commercial interest. You know these numbers better than I do. But simply to situate contextualize, I guess, the dialogue that we're having currently with Brazil and looking forward, what that will practically mean for us, and the measure of your ambition in some of the discussion in the respect of the hopes that you've expressed in your dialogue today. There are myriad threats to the global order. There are, in Latin America and the Caribbean in particular, we are tracking very closely a significant change in support in a generation particularly among the young, for democratic institutions, for representative democratic institutions. And the impact that that has on the rule of law. We use that term relatively broadly, but the question of governance, what that means for you, for instance, contractual certainty, when we want to talk about the outcomes of a trade agreement, they are as good as, of course, a trade agreement is a text. The implementation of a trade agreement is what matters, just as the implementation of international commitments is what matters. And there, what is crucial in our relations with Brazil now, as it emerges as a really significant global player under the new administration of Lula, is to ensure that we understand where our dialogue is consistent, where it's inconsistent, and look for pathways to ensure that we can achieve common objectives, that we're working as best we can in tandem. And I'm saying this as somebody who many years ago worked very closely with Brazilian officials on World Trade Organization issues. We did not often agree. In fact, very often we would be litigating one day, and then the next day would be engaged in very frank and productive conversations, working together in the same committees to advance rules on issues like market access, but also on trade facilitation and many of the issues of common interest to Brazil and Canada. But those dialogues become more important and also more challenging, of course, because Brazil's ambition has changed in that period of time. And it's incumbent on us to engage with Brazil as a significant partner in so many issues, just because of the numbers. It's the 12th largest economy now, depending on how you calculate GDP. Sixth most populous country. You look at a region like Sao Paulo, these are bigger than many of our bilateral relationships with other states. So by definition, Brazil becomes a strategic partner for Canada. That means there's lots of areas of cooperation, but of course we have to measure, this is part of our challenge, is measuring Brazil's ambition to work with us. Now, we know that on commercial matters, there's lots of opportunity. But some of those commercial opportunities have to be measured against the level of ambition in other areas. Climate change and related questions, that there's lots of variations on a theme there. Well, I'm using that as an umbrella term. That's affecting a lot of what previously would have been relatively simple dialogue. It could be on forestry production, it could be on mining, it's on the issues of indigenous relations, gender. This is factoring into all manner of bilateral conversations, and by extension then also colouring how we engage with one another in multilateral forums. The G20, Brazil's leadership in the G20, which of course it will be significant. The government has made, the Brazilian government has demonstrated significant leadership here, and we hope to be an active player in the upcoming G20 and COP exercises in Brazil. Made clear that Brazil will be setting a plan, and there's going to be variance among partners on what we can do with that plan. But we have already signalled, the Prime Minister has already signalled to President Lula our interest in working closely. What that will practically mean still remains to be seen, because much of the devil is in the details that we diplomats are going to have to negotiate. We're going to be working in tandem with partners like you. But it's clear that there's opportunities to take the bilateral relationship to leverage, if you will, the multilateral engagement to enhance the bilateral relationship. Conversely, though, what's also really important is ensure that, looking at, for instance, the conversation that's come out of the recent BRICS meeting, that we also understand the limits to where we can go in certain forums and what we will be able to do collectively. We have to build a strong bilateral foundation, which obviously, I'm not saying anything you don't know, was challenged until relatively recently. We build a strong foundation, and then you can see measured engagement, measured improvements on the multilateral front, and that is where we are at the moment. Our governments have committed to specific. We're looking at specific outcomes to try and establish specific milestones that will allow us to advance the dialogue. It could be on trade, it could be on broad economic issues. It's very specifically on things like climate change, environmental concerns, and larger financial issues, global stability. Of course, matters like human rights, gender equality, inclusive trade are part of that dialogue, but we're trying to measure these in sort of in tangible elements so that we move beyond talking points. This is partly a challenge because, of course, with Brazil's engagement in multilateral forums, we just had the G20 meetings in India. There are so many platforms now for dialogue. It's making the time to forge the links is partly a logistical challenge for us. But we've already had meetings between several meetings between President Lula and Prime Minister Trudeau. We expect the same thing to happen at UNGA, which is coming up in a few days. We have the foreign ministers are already in steady contact, and we hope to have Minister Vera here in Canada in the not too distant future. We are engaging at below the level of ministers on a regular basis. I myself am going down to Brasilia in a few days to look at our platform and particularly how our missions in Brazil are supporting Canadian business and their Brazilian partners in the field to make sure that we're doing it in the most efficient way possible. And in addition, we've also had meetings with on security, with our Chief Trade Commissioner and her counterpart in Brazil, the Canadian Ambassador for Climate Change. There have been a number of threads, a number of lines in the water, if you will. And now it's really down to the brass tacks. How are we going to take these early engagements and turn them into tangible outcomes? So we had the Defence Cooperation Agreement, which was an early harvest for us. It's been something that's been discussed between the two governments for quite some time. Normally that wouldn't touch a great deal on most of the people in the room there in Toronto, but these kinds of engagements also support us under the auspices of the WTO on procurement, because they facilitate transactions. They give opportunities for us to direct partners either through the CCC, well, typically through the CCC, but not necessarily through the CCC, Canadian Commercial Corporation, to look at export opportunities in Brazil. It also allows for opportunities for partners in Brazil to engage with Canadian companies. But that's not just on trade, on defence, of course. That's also on, it extends to conversations that we're having around something as basic as the recent drama on fire relief here in Canada, where we've received support from Brazil. So we have engagement now through much more than we've had previously through individual departments. Natural Resources Canada is speaking with its partners in Brazil to look at not just at mining, because I know that that's been a topic of engagement and there's been some progress and perhaps some halting progress on that. But there's a commitment to re-engage. We expect NRCan officials to be down in Brazil in the not too distant future to be looking at those issues, but also at extending those conversations into broader bilateral cooperation that goes outside the traditional areas of interest. So we clearly see that there is, as Brazil has made, as President Lula has made clear, Brazil's ambitions to play, to represent what we might loosely refer to as the global south, even if I don't particularly like the term, and the implications that that has for how we engage with partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. We can't just be irresponsible, we have to be active. I think that So as I said, part of the challenge at the moment is coming down on, like, rationalising, if you will, all the areas of mutual interest. There are many. Understanding that if you're looking at your particular focus on commercial interests, some of that's also revitalising the WTO, where we previously had extremely good working relations with the Brazilian government, where we, as I mentioned, despite the often competing interests, we understood that we had to have a strong basis for engagement, because we were sort of competing with all the other players and the bigger players, and it was in our interest to work in tandem. So Brazil is part of the Ottawa Group. We really still expect progress in the WTO. We think it has to be the principal forum for our engagement. That has in some measure affected the advancement of other bilateral or regional instruments. But also we have to be realistic about where we can move with this in the near term. And so we continue to engage with the Brazilian government on opportunities for bilateral trade. There is an ongoing conversation, as you know, with the European Union and Brazil, which is affecting our progress, but we're tracking it very closely. As well, we also had to look at what's going to happen in Argentina. I'm just going to look a bit further afield, because that will have consequences for Brazil's leadership in the region, how Mercosur is what's going to happen within Mercosur. The recent invitation for Argentina to join the BRICS could get rebuffed with the new administration. That might have implications for Brazil's outlook within the region, because I think that's another area where we have to be particularly cautious, is Brazil's interests, for instance, with Venezuela, with Colombia, with Argentina, also have to factor into our analysis of where we engage with Brazil bilaterally. I can just briefly mention that an EDC, I believe my colleague from EDC will speak. I've recently spoken with EDC officials who are going to be engaging with partners to advance our investment interests and trade interests with Brazil. It's still the third largest partner. We fully understand that. This is a relationship that is only growing. And of course, it's not just trade, it is bilateral investment opportunity. It's indirect investment opportunity. We're very alive to that, whether it's financial institutions, some of our pension funds, whether it's large institutional investors in Brazil looking at opportunities here. And of course, the future opportunities in areas like not just critical minerals themselves, which is of course a subject of much discussion at the moment, but also the downstream opportunities, what that means, expanding production capability in battery technology, or in supply chains, facilitating supply chains within the region, where we are engaged actively also with the United States. Our inclusive trade strategy, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time, we are still focusing on inclusive trade. It's a dialogue that has received a very positive response from the Brazilian government, understanding we need to engage small and medium-sized enterprises to bring more women into the equation. Partners like, for instance, some of the mining companies like Vale, but we know that they are already heavily engaged in this exercise within their communities, and we welcome that leadership. There I see that there is, as we talked about PDAC, if you talked about PDAC, we fully understand the significant value of the mining relationship in Brazil. That is only going to grow. We expect a similar relationship to growth here in Canada as we are trying to develop our critical minerals strategy. And we see Brazil's leadership as essential to help support that plan. And last but not least, I'm going to talk briefly about education and mobility and tourism. I know that that's a significant interest to many of you. EduCanada's program in Brazil is extremely successful. We know that. It's helpful for us to know, as well from my side, where the value you see from the missions, where you actually get best engagement, what we can do to assist. Brazil remains, I think, the 5th largest country globally for Canada for language students. and the education associations are extremely active. So we know that you're a strong partner. We really appreciate your interest in working with us. We really want to support you. And whether or not we end up with Mercosur in the Mercosur Canada FTA in the near term, what we do have, and this is clear to me, is first of all, a strong interest on both sides to work together on economic issues, whether it's at the commercial level with companies or at the macroeconomic level in international institutions. We also have strong foundations in investment and bilateral trade, and we have instruments, whether or not they're a free trade agreement, that allow us to support you effectively, and there are opportunities for growth. So that's a very broad picture from my chair, and I think I'll stop there in the interest of your mental health. So, muito obrigado.
Jason, you gotta be careful, because when you stop, I talk too much. We do have one question that we'd like to ask, and it's coming from Lila Hallorishan, who is our co-chair of our Ottawa chapter. And Lila, you had a question you wanted to ask Director General Jason Taylor. Just go.
Director General, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us today. Quite a quick question that I think some of our members and perhaps some people who want to become members might be interested in hearing. And as you see Brazil becoming a more strategic partner for Canada, what is the role that the Chamber and the members can play in that trajectory?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And so I mentioned, you talked the strategic value of relations with Brazil. I think because they have changed, you know this as well, they've changed a lot. And for instance, with the government of President Lula, there was a re-engagement and a commitment to many interests and issues, and an ambition that has clearly been demonstrated that is still being played out. It's still being measured. Necessarily, though, the situation, going back to, for instance, when we started the Canada-Mercosur FTA negotiations, the relationship is much more complex than it was 20 years ago, right? But complexity also offers opportunity. The complexity means that we are having conversations around subjects where we did not have dialogue before, right? Now, we're not necessarily always going to agree, but to the point about what the Chamber and what your members can do, some of that is also, it's understanding precisely where you see those challenges, right? Because it's so that we're not just speaking, I mentioned that an FTA, I'll come back to that because I know that that's something that's near and dear to many hearts. An FTA is just a text, right? And I say this as somebody who's negotiated them and litigated them. There is a text. What matters is how you actually apply it. And there, whether we have a text or not, what we do have is we have an active relationship. So when you're seeing irritants and issues, it's extremely important for us to understand where they are, so we can measure what we can do to help. It might be, because of the relative complexity, it's clear, for instance, mining, take mining as an example. As we engage, it's not the world that it was 20 years ago. So many of the concerns, of course, we have complex issues where Brazil is, like us in many cases, of two minds. We have institutional tensions that exist in both countries, right? Where we'll have partnerships on one side that are speaking two different languages, literally, even within the same government. And that's going to be normal, because that's the way these complex issues work out. So I think for you, what matters is for us to understand clearly what you're seeing in terms of the need for us to intervene, and where you also think that we should get out of the way, right? And this is particularly important for a chamber, looking at your membership, where many of you have a foot in both countries, or you have investment interests in both countries. You will understand clearly that means that your narrative is perhaps more complex for us to understand than on paper, right? So it helps for us to understand where you are playing in this.
Thank you very much for that answer. I just want to add too, if you're thinking of new places to put some attention, feel free to think about Santa Catarina. They're looking for more Canadian representation there, just to share that with you. Director General, thank you so much for participating and for sharing your thoughts. Invaluable for us. We're very, very grateful. Thank you for your time today. And now we're going to bring up our final panel, and which is going to be something very valuable, and I'm bringing up Daniela Camiso.
Thank you so much.
Is it on?
It's up.
No, it is.
Talk right into it.
Okay, so that's well. Thank you so much. First of all, it's a pleasure and a delight to be here. My name is Daniela Camiso, and as Peter mentioned, I'm just a brand new board member of BCCC. I'm a board member of CCBC, as well as board member in a number of other organizations. I'm off counsel of Sescom Barrier. Sescom Barrier is a full-service Brazilian law firm, and we are the only Brazilian law firm with an actual physical presence right here in Toronto. And today we have a spectacular panel in which we're going to try and tackle the next few years and what macroeconomics and macro trends are actually showing with regards to Brazil and Canada. I'd like to bring up, please, my two panelists. My apologies. Julian Ovens. Thank you so much, Julian. It's great to have you. Julian is the director at Canadian Commercial. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see absolutely anything. I try to read without my glasses, but I can't read without them. So anyway, Julian Ovens is the director at Canadian Commercial Corporation and a partner at Crestview Strategy. And we also have Rachel Guthrie, Vice President, ESG Integration and Export Development Canada. Thank you so much for coming. It's a real pleasure to have you. Now, as I mentioned, the purpose here with regards to this is first to have a bit of a fireside chat to discuss the macro trends that will impact Canada and Brazil. And we're just starting us off. Brazil and Canada are powerhouses in agriculture, mining, and a number of natural resources. They are giants in landmass, and as we know, like every other country, they are also susceptible to the climate crisis. So, in your view, what do you think are the parallels between these two countries with regards to opportunities and challenges associated with the climate crisis?
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. So I'll focus more on climate risk and opportunities, and then I'll pass to Julie. So there's so many similarities between Canada and Brazil, both very resource-based economies, large geographies, dispersed populations, indigenous populations. So from a climate risk perspective, we're seeing fires, natural disasters. So there's very much a physical risk element to the infrastructure that trade depends upon. So I'd see that similarity. Also from a transition risk perspective, we know that both economies need to transition to a lower carbon future, and supporting businesses to do that in an orderly way, so that we can, transition the economies, transition the job opportunities to move more into renewables and lower carbon options. And then agriculture, I think, is the third big macro trend that we would see. So much technology, so much innovation, so much demand for that food, from a food security perspective, to make sure that we're getting bigger yields from our agriculture to not only feed our own populations, but also from an export perspective. We're going to see more migration, population migration, as parts of the countries, become more susceptible. So many similarities between the two, and a lot to learn from each other.
Thanks very much. Maybe I'll dive into the auto example briefly. Lots of emissions from the automotive industry around the world. Brazil, for decades, has been leading the way in ethanol production, in ethanol use in vehicles. Well, what's Canada's situation? Well, let's look at the macro picture. 75% of our trade goes to the U.S., and the average auto part crosses the border seamlessly 7 times before ending up in a final vehicle that you drive here in North America. And we're in the midst of a huge transition to EVs. So is the very fresh in the last year, instructive at all in Brazil, and can we help? We had a choice to make. Do we, with the auto assembly we have and the auto ecosystem we have, do we want that to continue? And we had to put significant dollars in play in order to do that. We had to compete to a degree with the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. And we did, as a country, as taxpayers, as government, decide, to put billions of dollars, into that, in order to try to preserve that. Those auto facilities, by the way, are in ridings that are very important to form government in this country. They have good unionized jobs and the like. But we knew we couldn't compete dollar for dollar with the United States for every plant, for every piece of equipment. We've done it selectively, and I think we have sort of saved our auto industry and positioned our country, for the next generation. Can Brazil copy that? I would argue that the fiscal capacity probably isn't there to do that. So we can't compete dollar for dollar with the U.S. I think it's going to be tough for Brazil. But what about our institutional investors? What about the Brookfields of the world and our pension funds who are looking to make climate-forward investments? I think there is a huge fit and a great match.
Yeah, I wanted to just bring up 2 things. One thing that Rachel mentioned, and the other thing that Julian mentioned. The first thing is with regard to migration. I just had the opportunity of being in Belém for Exposibrão and the future of economies in the Amazon. And it was a really spectacular event and conference. And one of the things that they were discussing, specifically with regards to the Amazon and the issue of migration, is that one cannot forget the land size that is Brazil. And we cannot forget that the amount of internal migration that occurs and how that actually affects economies. So one of the things that when we look at the Amazon, we have sometimes a very romantic view of the forest when we forget there are cities such as Manaus and Belém with more than 1 million people living in those cities that also have to be a part of the economy, and how does this all fit in when we look at Canadian investors. There are opportunities there as well. I think that we look into that. And one thing that Julian said, and I think it goes with what Arno was mentioning, and the fact that the Brazilian logistics system is based on trucks. And the question is, what that industry will be doing with regards to EV. Can they get into it or not? I think that's a real issue. What other similarity of concerns do you think that companies operating in this sort of in the green space that you see between these 2 countries?
I think in some ways that regardless of geography, companies and businesses are experiencing ESG in the same way. So we recently went out and EDC did a survey of 350 Canadian companies and asked, what are the challenges with ESG? Where do you interact with ESG? Do you see it as a cost, a risk? I would bet that if we did the same survey in Brazil, the findings would be very, very similar. The number 1 place that ESG crops up in a conversation is supply chain. The second is strategic decisions, and the third is operations. And I think that's a very global experience. You know, to be competitive, to be the first choice in an RFP, companies are starting to have to issue ESG metrics around their emissions, their diversity, in order to win those contracts. So I'd say supply chain is the number one place where ESG is a factor.
My view of the Amazon is maybe partly romantic, but I spent a lot of time as a mining executive there looking at bauxite mines, so it's maybe rather practical as well. Look, the mining industry has always had to deal with ESG in some form or another, and all go upstream of the EV example I gave earlier, and talk certainly a little bit about critical minerals. So we've talked a lot about, you know, both countries have a great pedigree in mining, you know, which is excellent, but the idea of identifying a number of minerals that are important to the battery supply chain, and understanding where you're going to get you know, a supply, a responsibly sourced supply. It's traceable, sometimes using blockchain. People want to know where everything comes from. Consumers, and certainly the most recent generation of consumers that are, you know, buying vehicles today, you know, they want to understand the footprint in all three phases and types of emissions. So I think we can, you know, companies can learn from each other and can partner, and also look at what each government is doing in this space. And each government has identified, in the case of critical minerals, a number of minerals that are of first priority. There's some overlap between both countries. So those big battery, you know, large-scale battery minerals, copper, nickel, you know, cobalt, graphite, lithium. What's interesting is in Brazil's case, they also have potash and uranium, and I think phosphate. We produce a lot of potash in Canada, which also means our soil is very rich in potash, and we produce a lot of uranium in Canada. So they're actually no longer sort of tier 1 critical minerals, they're tier 2 critical minerals, and of course we export in large numbers, large amounts of potash. And I used to be head of strategy and development for potash business in the Canadian prairies, and we, you know, modeled, you know, Brazilian demand. You know, it was quite important. So again, the Canadian government has said, well, we're going to put $3.8 billion to work in this space. That sounds like a lot of money. It's not a lot of money, right? The potash mine we're building in Canada, capex of that mine, $7.5 billion US dollars. Of the $3.8 billion in the Canadian strategy, $1.5 billion is from a fund that when I worked in government and served as chief of staff to the Canadian ministers of foreign affairs and international trade, was 8 times oversubscribed. And despite people saying nice things about critical minerals, you know, now is the hour, there actually hasn't been a time that has been more challenging to raise equity capital. Why? Mining's cyclical, mining's capital intensive, the inputs are subject to inflation that we're all experiencing as consumers. So it's going to take a lot of careful policy making by governments in both countries. It's going to take investments by the majors who are very strategic but also very conservative, and it's going to take the entrepreneurship of smaller mining companies and smaller entrepreneurs and people who have discovered and produced those deposits over the years and created and grown those companies.
So I think, so one of the, I think this is I think perhaps this is one of the biggest challenges that we have today, is the fact that the people in power, governments, are fully cognizant of the importance of critical minerals, especially with regards to the energy transition and the green economy. But we also, I don't think, ever in human history have we had a situation in which communities and indigenous peoples have finally the right to say no with regards to certain projects, in which they actually have a voice, a much stronger voice than I think in history they have ever had. And so one of the pathways in order for us to bridge for those who are in power and communities is environmental social governance, is ESG. And what we have seen is also that ESG is being used as a de facto trade tool in assisting or pushing towards what's called friendshoring, reshoring, and the regionalization of supply chains, so that the supply chains are within more palatable and more friendly countries. Now, what is your view on that? Do you agree that that's exactly what's happening, or does it matter where the project is? We'll go after those minerals.
I'm out of government, so I'll speak openly. Let Rachel figure out what she wants to say.
Rachel, you're in a soft spot.
Yeah. So, what is critical, right? 5% of Canadian exports go to China. We haven't really defined what's critical to our economy. I think we would probably like most of that 5% to keep moving and just not talk about it. But, well, we can, we all learned that sometimes pharma is critical, sometimes PPE is critical, maybe some infrastructure, maybe some minerals, certainly defense. But what about food? Well, boy, that's a lot of stuff. When Prime Minister Trudeau was with President Biden in the last months, he gave a speech which he's repeated in various forms, when he said something along the lines of economic policy, climate policy, and security policy are not just interconnected, they are the same thing. So there's a lot baked into that. Who is our friend? Canadian economy is incredibly trade dependent. Like 2/3 of our GDP is trade dependent. Less than 1/3 of the US and Chinese economies are trade dependent. Do we need a country with over 200 million people that's a member of the G20? I think we do. So as somebody who is Chief Staff of Trade Minister helped kick off the Mercosur free trade negotiations, I really hope they come to pass, and a lot more quickly than the quarter century that it's taken to do the deal with the EU. So I just had to get that one in there. But this is a different world. The WTO is not working at the moment. It's not. We need to be selective about where we spend billions of dollars to onshore an EV assembly plant, or a battery assembly plant, or a cathode manufacturer, or a copper foil manufacturer, and where we can reliably depend on other countries that are sometimes NATO members, sometimes CUSMA members, as we call it, USMCA, but sometimes G20 members, and some are just reliable, friends and allies. As people pointed out, the trade agreements themselves are not as important necessarily as the promotion of the by companies and of the trade. So we are. It's a journey of discovery around friendshoring and ally shoring and nearshoring. But I think the two countries absolutely need each other. And one of the best pieces of news that I saw is that since the last WTO ministerial meetings in Bali, the WTO has done a list of trade actions by each country that are either protectionist or liberalized. And the two best countries with the most liberalized activities are, the number one is Canada, and the number two is Brazil. And the third worst is Argentina. I think you might like to hear that one. So there is some hope for liberalized trade, but in some areas it is going to happen within a different framework than we have all been used to in the last decades. By definition, it will be inflationary. But it may mean that when push comes to shove, we will feel more secure about things that are important to us and important to a very climate-sensitive economy. Rachel, did I give you enough time to?
You did.
Okay.
Thank you. Our message is you can't do business on a dead planet. So the sooner we start integrating, the environment, the social components and considerations into our business models, the more resilient those businesses will be. And so we do see integration of ESG factors as a competitive advantage for businesses. Yes, it's complex, but we're putting out resources on our website to help companies understand where to start, how to look at human rights, how to look at energy efficiency. And quite frankly, Brazil is really far ahead. We have so much to learn from the sustainability initiatives and the renewable initiatives in Brazil. So it's an exciting time, a challenging one. There's lots to do, but looking forward to the partnerships ahead. EDC has offices in São Paulo and Rio. We focus a lot on connection financing. In 2022, we did $500 million in connection financing, so there's lots of opportunities to open doors. Another challenge, I think, is also in the carbon markets, looking at carbon border adjustments, trying to get ahead of that issue and understand how that will impact businesses and exports as well. So I'm very cognizant that we're between people and their cocktails, so I'll keep it short.
No, I appreciate it. I arrived back from Vancouver to Rio de Janeiro in 2019, and I was already working with ESG, and I got to Brazil and I said, ESG, it's the thing, and all of my Brazilian friends said, ESG is never coming to Brazil because we have bigger problems. Not even 2 years later, it's a tsunami of ESG, and now ESG is at the heart of every single discussion in Brazil. And you're absolutely right. In certain aspects, Brazil is far advanced, especially with regards to sustainability discussion. But I do wonder where they are from a corporate perspective. Of course, we have the leaders, corporate leaders that are advanced, but I think that there is a mass of mid-market Brazilian companies that are still very far in their ESG journey, and that I think that there's a real space there to be conquered, no doubt.
Can I just say, if they want access to that Canadian institutional capital that I was talking about earlier, that those conversations will start bringing the standard up. It will bring the conversation to a different part of the economy, and part of ESG is like understanding being responsible for your supply chain. All of it, and that's what consumers want to see. That's what regulators want to see. So that should be an area of cooperation and growth together.
No, thank you so much. And I think I just want to make sure that we are okay on timing. We're good with timing. Okay, good. And I just wanted to go back a little bit to something that the Director General mentioned, and that we've talked a little bit about this. But I think it's arguably, we are seeing the biggest geopolitical shifts in the last 100 years with what is happening with the expansion of the BRICS, the African Union joining the G20. We are seeing a real rise of the Global South. And of course, we've seen it historically in a number of different moments, but I think that there is a real moment right now with regards to the Global South. And what is your view? And you've mentioned this already, that ultimately Brazil and Canada are natural allies. But what else, in your view, does really bring these two countries together? Where are the spaces in which you think that we can grow, within this partnership? I hope I didn't surprise you.
I think we need to move towards an interest-based foreign policy and trade policy that understands our role. In many ways, GDP per capita in Canada is higher than Brazil. But in many ways, like Brazil will be able to throw its weight around more than we will in some fora. And they're going to have strengths that Canada doesn't have. And Canadians espouse certain values, and Brazilians do too. Neither of us are monolithic peoples. There's a lot of diversity in both of our countries. But respect for human rights, respect for indigenous rights, respect for the environment. These are all areas where we're going to have to understand each other and have an ongoing dialogue. What I said earlier about our dependence on the United States means that we do have to be extra sensitive to the suite of issues that are important to the U.S. It means that our economic approach to China is going to have to be, in order to be pragmatic vis-a-vis the U.S. relationship, it's going to be different than Brazil's. But we have to be flexible around that approach. We have to focus on our goals together. Director General earlier was talking about our commitment to the rule of law, find multilateral bodies where we can work together. And as somebody who was a member of this government previously, and I should mention that while I am a director of CCC, I'm not here speaking on behalf of CCC. My wife used to work for EDC. It's an amazing organization, but I'm speaking in my private capacity. But I really think that our interest in our relationship needs to go beyond whether our leaders are similarly like-minded at the moment. Because look at, one of the challenges with Mercosur is that sometimes when Argentina's ready, Brazil's not ready. And sometimes when Brazil's ready, Argentina's not ready. And that is the nature of that organization. And that organization only has 4 countries. And among them is not an aspiring superpower like China, which is central to the BRICS. So I think we need to be pragmatic, but Canada is not. It is not an option to shrink into our shell. It is not an option economically, as I said, 2/3 trade-dependent economy. But it doesn't help our security interests. It's not going to help us on issues like migration. But I think we have as much to learn from Brazil as they do from us in these areas.
I'm going to go back to the comment about agriculture and just that whole farmers feed cities, because in both geographies, there's a huge demand to feed the densification of the population. And I think we've got a lot to learn from Brazil just in the resilience of their supply chains and their local supply chains as well. COVID taught us a lot about becoming more self-sufficient. But the other place I think we have a lot in common is just the investment needed in infrastructure. You see mudslides in BC takes out a road, the impact that has. You see the investment needed to make our grid more resilient, like the North American grid has to grow 3 to 5 times over the next decade to cope with renewable energy demand and solar. So there's a huge investment needed, and this is where the opportunity for private-public partnerships comes into play. Is just how do we get the capital to the places that need it the most?
Thank you so much. Now I wanted to make sure that we have some time from questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? Arno.
Do you need a mic? Do I need a microphone?
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. It's not as much as a question, but a comment. I'm going to speak on behalf of CIFA, the Canadian International Freight Forwarders Association, which regulates over 400 freight forwarders plus 150 associate members in Canada. And this year, we, as president of the board, this year we incorporated customs brokers, truck load brokers, warehouses into our membership, because we want to be the voice of logistics and supply chain in Canada. And we work very hard in creating an ESG blueprint to teach, you're talking about logistics and ESG and all of that. So we are very focused in teaching supply chain in Canada how to be nice to the environment and social causes and all of that. So maybe to the chamber, how about a committee that can help Brazilians learn about supply chain, the experiences?
We have one, and it is our largest committee.
Wonderful. I never heard of it. So invite me
you should be on it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. You see, this topic always brings interesting conversation. So I think Canada has so much to teach Brazil about supply chain and the rail system, as I was talking before, because I think it would be great to minimize the truck impact in Brazil, the carbon imprint of trucking in Brazil into rail, right? It would be so much better. So anyway, that was my comment. I just want you all to know how much CIFA is doing to try to teach its members to minimize the impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Arno. Are there any? Sorry.
I'll just comment on, I heard some of the speakers talk about rail. Rail's amazing and in many ways. It's very expensive. And it's, these days very challenging. And I'm familiar with the truck backups at the ports in Brazil. At one point in my mining life, I had to model all that stuff. A Canadian bulk shipper who does not have competitive rail access at origin and destination pays rates that are 35% higher. So just be careful you do not create a monopoly or regional monopolies or an oligopoly if you're serious about rail. It's not slam dunk.
Do we have any other questions?
I'm going to make one quick comment. CN Rail actually has a 2% ownership of a railway in Brazil that's been dormant for 2 decades, but they still own it. So, we should be dragging them in there, just to let you know. One thing is, the EDC is one of the best organizations in the country, and it's an unsung hero, like the Trade Commissioner Service. I'm going to talk for a second. And I just want you to understand that you have Rachel Guthrie here, who is an expert on ESG. She is the person who is, we have EDC, which is actually about investment and risk assessment and all this stuff, but they are doing it also to save the world. And you have an expert in the world right here in Rachel Guthrie. I want you to know that this is a real get for us, and so we're thrilled to have her. Julian Ovens has incredible influence with the federal government, and the two of them should secretly talk. But I just wanted to share that you may not realize just the quality and caliber of the people on this panel, but they are at a very high level, and we are very blessed and lucky to have them here. So thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for coming.
And one thing too, we also use EDC all the time because what they can do is they can actually pre-qualify a candidate or a company in another country, and they have a huge pile of people who are useful for us. Anyway, thank you very much. I want to get a fast photo, so just you have to stand and smile, and I won't give the finger this time, and then, and so, yep, come. I want somebody to get a photo of our lovely team, and now, beautiful. Great. Round of applause. Thank you so much. Folks, I still stand between you and your cocktails. And so what I would like to do is we have a special guest here too. We have the Minister Chargé d'Affaires of Alexandre Lima, who is representing the new incoming ambassador in the embassy in Ottawa, but he is not here yet. But Alexandre, please come up and say a few words of greeting for us.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Peter, for this opportunity. I would like first and foremost to commend BCCC for this initiative. We've been seeing some growth in trade relations between Brazil and Canada in recent years, and to have that good trend going further, we need to foster dialogue, to understand more, to get a further look into the opportunities and also at the challenges that are out there. So it's really a great initiative, and we are happy to be with you this afternoon and learn some more about this. And I'm talking about learning because I have joined the team at the Brazilian Embassy recently, so it's time to get familiar with the different files, the opportunities, the people. So I'm really delighted to be here. And one thought that I would like to share this time, listening carefully to everyone and seeing how comprehensive this relationship between Brazil and Canada can be, and the different fields to explore and to improve, is that this discussion, this reflection we embarked on is not just comprehensive, but I see it as an encouraging one, I would say, for at least two very good reasons. The first one being, given that we reached this point of complexity and opportunity, as Ambassador Tollens said earlier, because Brazil and Canada started to discuss topics that were not on the bilateral agenda before. That means we reached a higher level of trust, and trust is just one key element for us to make progress in any area we are working on. So to see this raise in the level of trust is definitely very encouraging. It is one key positive development, and we should build on this positive trend that we have right now. And the second reason that I find particularly encouraging is precisely the essence of the conversation today, which is an opportunity to improve our knowledge about each other. As a diplomat, in some of my previous postings, I realized that some opportunities would just go undetected because people don't know enough about the other partner, about the culture or the, say, legal framework in the other country. And the fact that we're here discussing, having an opportunity to listen to those who are familiar with that and open to learn more and to, say, do some fine-tuning on how to approach the partner is really also very positive. So this opportunity to improve mutual knowledge, the raising trust are some points that I would like to highlight at this time. And I also want to say that the doors at the Brazilian Embassy are open. We are happy to join that effort to make the relation better and more fruitful for everyone. Thank you very much for this.
And now we have actually one person standing between us and the cocktails. But before we go to cocktails, you've got to remember what it is. It is networking. So I want to remind you who is in the room. So from the consul, the Brazilian consulate in Toronto, we have Andres Cebolla. You've got to remember to talk to him. He's very important. Alexandra Pana is down there. Jennifer Cook is here from the EDC. Pay attention to her. Nina Garcia is here from EDC. We have Fogo de Chão represented over there. You can ask him about his $1 million. You have Karen over here, who's a matchmaker extraordinaire. You want to be able to talk to her. Lila from Discover Magazine is here. We have students from Centennial College, with Atul Atus has brought them here. Remember, we have both experienced people and we have also the young people we're bringing up. We have the wonderful members of BCBA, who you missed the presentation we did on you folks earlier, but just to let you know, this is the Brazil-Canada Bar Association. And then you're whispering and I can't get it. Sorry. Do it for me. Shout it out. Shout it out. I want to know. Dominique from EDC. Dominique, oh yes, but Dominique, come on, we celebrated you plenty in this event. But I will tell you that Dominique is actually our representative to the EDC, and she has been instrumental, really, in keeping us on the straight and narrow, because we have rules we have to follow, and she likes us to follow them, so which is terrific. Anyway, I wanted to, and we also have all our chapter chairs, and we have our committee chairs here too. We would like you to talk to them all. But providing closing remarks now will be a true friend of the Chamber and of mine, and that is Ambassador Vanja Nobrega, who is Consul General of Brazil in Toronto. She really is the person you should know. One thing I want to share before she starts her remarks is, if you have a business that you want to work on, if you are looking for advice, if you're looking for candid advice about whether or not your business is going to thrive, then I want you to talk to her, and she's always available. She really is one of the biggest assets Brazil has in Canada. I can't impress upon you more about how great she's been in more than a decade here, right, with us. She is, of course, our Diplomat of the Decade, and we were very pleased to give her that award at the beginning of the year, and we are grateful that she's here now. So, Ambassador Vanja, could you share some remarks, please?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Peter, as you know, is a very generous person, but thank you for your words. And thank you very much for all of you being here today. And I'd like to actually start with thank you for the BCCC to organize this amazing seminar, high level. I did realize the level of the panelists, and I would like to start actually with a question that Dr. Daniela Chimizo asked you, and I will leave for you to answer. Not today, but the next days and months. Canada and Brazil, we are natural allies and natural friends, partners. But what is missing here? I think there's a lot of room to fill, and each one of you in your field can fill up the gap. It was amazing questions, Daniela. Congratulations for your panel, for the panelists, for everything. But ladies and gentlemen, now, it's a personal satisfaction for me to attend the celebration of the 5th anniversary of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. And I would like to take this opportunity to register a note of praise for the excellent work done by its members in the last half a century. Having an active Chamber of Commerce to promote the bilateral trade between two countries is a privilege. For Brazil and Canada, this privilege is largely enhanced by the myriad of initiatives conducted by the BCCC, not only in trade, but also in the wide spectrum of sectors, from mining, agriculture to startup, ESG, always committed to the best ESG practices. Actually, I'm honored to be a member of the Inclusion Diversity Committee of the BCCC. The bilateral trade between Brazil and Canada has reached a new peak in 2022, with a trade flow of more than $10 billion US dollars. This corresponds to an increase of 41% compared to 2021, and confirms the trend of substantial growth recorded in the last 3 years. I did try to find how much it was 50 years ago, but I couldn't. There was no data registered, but I found 25 years ago. And 25 years ago, the trade flow between Brazil and Canada was less than 20% of the volume we see today. Now, our data platforms show that Canada has consolidated its position as a major trade partner of Brazil, being the 13th most important market for Brazilian exports and the 12th largest exports to Brazil. the opening of the Canadian market for Brazilian beef and pork, for example, and the delivery of Embraer jets brought by Porter Airlines must contribute to this continuous increase of Brazil's export to Canada. In addition to this, negotiations are underway to open specific markets to producers and exports on both sides. Along with the new opportunities brought by this new reality of Brazil and Canada bilateral relations, new challenges emerge, and I'm quite sure that Brazilian business people are very well prepared to face them. BCCC plays a vital role in this regard, as well bringing to Canada the best we have in Brazil. The Minister of Foreign Relations of Brazil, represented here by myself, by Minister Alexandre, my colleague André, and Alexandre Piana, and also the office of our consulates in Montreal and Vancouver. We are very grateful to BCCC for its invaluable, tireless work, and especially for the very close partnership in a number of projects, all dedicated to our mutual interest of improving even more, day after day, the bilateral relations between our two countries. I also like to say a word regarding Arno Mello, who is tireless to support the Brazilian business community here in Ontario. And I have been witnessing your work. It's amazing and it's inspiration for all of us. Thank you, Arno. On a personal note, I would like to express my gratitude to the co-chairs of BCCC, Peter Hawkins, Danielle Risica, Fred Marcus, who left, Paola Saad, who is Tex-Mexing, Rachel Boechat, I don't know if she's here, Adriana Gartner, that just joined the BCC. Thank you, all of you, for their impeccable dedication to building precious bridges between our two countries. When Peter mentioned that I'm open to work, to talk with you, it's true, but it's not only me. It's André, it's Alexandre, and we have Stefania, and we have Angela, who has been working at the consulate for more than 30 years. Those people are very, very valuable to us. So please contact us. We are not only bureaucrats, we are human beings, and we are here to help you. And so I'd like to thank all of you for being here and to celebrate this amazing anniversary, 50th anniversary of BCCC. Thank you and congratulations.